Greg Andrick here, bringing you another business freedom conversation. So this one I call the future of taxes. It took 236 years for the U.S. to accumulate $12 trillion in debt. We've added $20 trillion in the last 10 years. The debt ceiling compromise that Congress just went through with the president adds $4 trillion over the next 2 years. U.S. banks have $2.2 trillion in unrealized losses. Further rate increases will probably undermine the banking system more than the S&L crisis in the 70s and 80s. The new debt total in 2 years will be $36 trillion. Wow. Become really easy to spend $1 trillion. Why is this the future of taxes? Because this will eventually have to be repaid. And there's a bunch of situations and scenarios that can cause the fact that they can't continue to sell bonds, and bonds mostly to foreign investors, to do this. So it's something for you to think about as a small business owner, because you're the primary person they're going to go to get the taxes. Realize that the average American, this is according to the AICPA, I get these documents once a year, the Americans pay more in taxes than they do food, clothing, and shelter combined. All those excise taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, property taxes, registration taxes, pay a lot of taxes. And this debt of $36 billion, and it's not like they're going to be able to turn themselves off immediately, but what would happen if the U.S. couldn't sell any more bonds? And just the service on the debt is becoming a larger and larger piece, and that needs to be paid with taxes. They're going to look to you for those taxes. So I have a video here that I got from the Wall Street Journal that's about Jerome Powell. And he may be somebody that gets it right and may have the skill set to navigate through this, because we're also experiencing built-in inflation. And if they continue to sell these kind of bonds, raise interest rates, wow, what a situation with the banking system, real estate, everything. It's complicated. Take a look at this video about who Jerome Powell is, what kind of skills he has, what he's done in the past. And it may give you some comfort that he may be the right person to navigate through this. I don't know. But it seems like he doesn't have a singular mindset, and that he's flexible. And that's kind of, I think, what we need now. And the other thing for you is to get your house in order, because over these next 2 years, and particularly 2 years from now, if President Biden's reelected, you're going to see a lot of taxes. He had a lot of taxes in the Inflation Reduction Act that were eliminated. So if he gets control, they're going to be coming to you, and I think that's what you need to think about. And the main reason is we're going to owe $36 trillion. It's a lot of money. Anyhow, take a look at this video. I think you'll find it very fascinating, and then give you ideas on what to do with your business. It's Greg Andrick. I'll catch you on the next one.
When Fed Chair Jerome Powell speaks,
today, the FOMC raised its policy interest rate by 0.25 percentage point.
The markets move. That's because the head of the U.S. Federal Reserve is the most powerful economic voice in the nation. And Fed chairs can generally be put into two categories.
Hawks are more worried about controlling inflation, and doves tend to be more worried about making sure the employment market's strong.
But Powell isn't one or the other. Here's how Powell's mindset helped him rise to the top and keep the Fed united. The U.S. Federal Reserve functions as a bank for banks.
We look after the overall stability of the financial system, and we have tools to do that.
Recently, most Fed chairs have been academics or economists, so he's a little bit different from the Fed chairs that we've had in the past few decades.
He was never trained in formal economic modeling, but he's smart, and he's got a great staff, and he catches on.
After a career in investment banking and law in New York, Powell left to become an undersecretary at the Treasury.
Speaking for myself, that accounted in large measure for my own conduct at the meeting, which was to be fairly passive.
In 2012, he joined the Fed's Board of Governors to help guide the organization.
He has a fine reputation. He should be a fine member.
But his practical experience in finance gave him a different skill set.
Powell hasn't been preparing his whole life to be Fed chair. He hasn't been part of this priesthood of monetary policy theorists, and so that's brought different strengths and weaknesses for him in the job.
He watches the data, he listens to what economists and modelers say and what financial market people are saying, but not what politicians are saying.
His prioritization of data, not economic models, has meant that he's not always a hawk, economic shorthand for those who prioritize fighting inflation. And he's not always a dove, taking action to boost employment.
He's a pragmatist, he's a realist, he's not an ideologue, and so he's going to change his mind when he sees the facts on the ground changing.
And things certainly changed in March 2020.
The toll is growing by the hour.
Major retailers are also going dark.
It doesn't seem fair that people should lose everything they have, including their homes, over this.
Powell's data-driven mentality was guiding the largest economic stimulus plan ever undertaken in the U.S.
At that point, the whole Federal Reserve Board, certainly including Jay Powell, are leaning very strongly in the dovish direction.
The Fed can also contribute in important ways by providing a measure of relief and stability during this period of constrained economic activity, and by using our tools to ensure that the eventual recovery is as vigorous as possible.
In his response to the emergency, Powell stretched his power farther than Fed chairs had done before.
He got after his staff. He said, we're falling behind this thing. He said, it feels like we're swimming after a speedboat. He encouraged them to really get on top of this, and they just announced a bunch of stuff this one weekend in March 2020.
He instructed the Fed to begin a torrent of bond buying programs to stabilize markets and slashed interest rates. That month, it bought Treasury and mortgage securities at a pace of nearly $75 billion a day.
The criticism on Powell has been that maybe he overreacts to the problem at the moment. So you kept interest rates too low when maybe you should have been more concerned about the risk of an inflation shock.
That risk became a reality. Fed holdings had reached $9 trillion, and inflation had hit a 40-year high.
As Americans well know, it remains painfully high.
Powell had to pivot again and tried to keep the Fed's rate-setting committee, or FOMC, voting together to get policy passed. He began acting as a hawk to bring down inflation.
But everything that economists thought they knew about inflation in 2021 turned out to be pretty wrong.
It's not going to be, we don't think, smooth. It's probably going to be bumpy.
I think at a time like this, we're very fortunate to have somebody with the temperament of Jay Powell, who listens to people, understands different points of view, distills the different pieces of information that come in to the Fed, and makes considered judgments about what to do, and then goes and persuades people that may be on one extreme or the other extreme to come into the center and go along with the consensus.
Powell kept the hawks and doves united, with only one dissenting vote against rate raises since the end of 2021.
A lot of the people I talk to say that he's very good at taking people's concerns seriously, making them feel like they're being listened to, figuring out what a reasonable compromise position might be. And that, I think, explains why he's been able to keep the committee so united during this pretty difficult stretch.
Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals.
As he confronts an uncertain economic landscape, his empirical mindset will continue to be tested.
How we look back on Powell's tenure as chair really depends on what happens with inflation and the economy over the next 2 years.
How well did he handle this uncertain period? What did the economy look like in 2024 and 2025? That history is yet to be written, and I think future historians of the Fed will judge him strongly on how that looks.